Nobody hits a man-sized target past 50 yards with a 1911. That's a physics problem, not a skill problem. That was what the instructor said, loud enough for the whole firing line to hear, while the 80-year-old man in the faded Marine Corps cap stood quietly at the back of the class. The old man didn't argue. He didn't even look up. He just asked in a voice so soft the instructor almost missed it. "Son, could I borrow one of those pistols for a minute?" 12 minutes later, that same instructor was sitting on his range bag in the dirt, staring at a steel plate 100 yards downrange, unable to say a single word. If you believe a man's service should be honoured long after he hangs up the uniform, type the word honour in the comments right now, because what you're about to hear really happened on a dusty desert range in southern Arizona on a Saturday morning in October. The man's name was Elias Whitmore. Before sunrise that morning, Elias Whitmore was already awake. He was always awake before the sun. 60 years of a body trained to rise in the dark don't quit just because a man gets old. He sat on the edge of his bed in a small ranch house outside Sierra Vista, Arizona, and he worked the stiffness out of his right shoulder the way he did every morning. Slow circles, one direction and then the other. The shoulder had a piece of metal in it from 1969, and the metal had never once let him forget where it was. He pulled on a pair of dark denim jeans, faded at the knees but clean, and a long-sleeved tan shirt that he buttoned all the way to the collar, because that was how he had been taught to dress as a boy in eastern Kentucky. He laced up a pair of tan work boots that he had owned for 9 years. He put on a black ball cap with the eagle, globe and anchor stitched on the front in thread so sun-faded it was almost grey. Then he went to the closet in the spare bedroom and he knelt down, and he worked the dial on the small floor safe the way he had for the last 22 years in that house. Inside the safe, on a bed of folded blue felt, sat a Colt model 1911, a one-pistol manufactured in 1943. The slide was still Parkerized gunmetal grey. The wooden grip panels were original, checkered walnut, worn smooth at the corners, where his right thumb had sat for more hours than most men live. He picked up the pistol the way a chelist picks up a bow. He pressed the magazine release. He racked the slide back and locked it. He checked the chamber the way he had checked it 10,000 times before. Only then did he exhale. He had slept poorly the night before. He had almost not gone to the range. But his nephew's boy, a young man named Travis who had just enlisted in the Marine Corps, had begged him to come watch the tactical class and tell him if the money was worth it. What Elias did not know, as he slid the 1911 into a worn leather holster and placed it in a canvas range bag, was that the man running that class had already decided, without ever having met him, exactly what kind of old fool he was about to humiliate in front of 20 paying students. The range was called Vertex Precision, and on any given Saturday it looked less like a shooting facility and more like a catalogue shoot for tactical gear. The parking lot held lifted pickup trucks and matte black SUVs, and the occasional sports car driven by a dentist from Tucson who wanted to feel like a door kicker on the weekend. The main bay stretched out a full 300 yards into the flat Arizona desert, the berms rising like brown waves on either side, steel plates hanging from heavy chains at 25, 50, 100, 150, 200 and 300 yards. A long firing line of concrete pads ran along the near edge. Behind the pads, a row of shade canopies held folding tables where the students set out their gear, each one a small monument to disposable income. There were chest rigs that had never been in combat, plate carriers with no plates in them, red dot sights that cost more than some people's rent, and suppressors that sat in plastic cases like jewellery. A single banner, stretched between two posts at the classroom shack, read Vertex Tactical in angular silver letters that looked like they had been designed by someone who had watched too many video game trailers. The instructor's pickup truck was parked sideways across two spots at the front of the lot, a black F250 with the same Vertex logo wrapped across the rear window. Elias parked his own truck, a 1998 Ford Ranger with faded red paint and a dented tailgate, at the very back of the lot, next to a chain-link fence. He took his time walking up. He did not hurry for anyone anymore. As he crossed the gravel, 3 men standing near the classroom laughed at something their instructor had said, and one of them, a tall kid with a sleeve of tattoos and an expensive watch, glanced at the old man with the beat-up truck and said something under his breath to the others. What none of those men knew as they sized up the quiet stranger with the worn boots and the cheap canvas bag was that there was a name stitched into the inside lining of that bag in olive drab thread, and that name was stenciled on a brass plaque inside a glass case at the Marine Corps Marksmanship Training Unit in Quantico, Virginia, where it had been displayed without interruption for the last 31 years. The instructor's name was Cade Mercer. He was 36 years old. He stood 6 feet even, and he spent a great deal of energy looking like a man who stood 6 feet too. He wore a black Vertex polo shirt tucked into grey tactical pants, a battle belt with a Kydex holster, a custom staccato pistol on his right hip, and a pair of orange-lensed shooting glasses pushed up on a shaved head. He had served 4 years in the army as a cavalry scout, which he did not often mention, and he had spent 2 years as a contractor on a static guard contract in Kuwait, which he mentioned constantly. He had built Vertex Tactical out of a YouTube channel and a careful jawline, and on that Saturday morning he had 20 students paying $450 apiece to learn what he called the modern fighting pistol. He walked out in front of the class at exactly 8 o'clock, clapped his hands once and told everyone to gather in. Elias stood at the back, arms folded, cap low, silent. Travis stood beside him, trying to look serious. Mercer launched into his opening talk, the one he'd given 100 times about the evolution of the handgun and the obsolescence of tradition. He held up his staccato. He praised its double-stack frame, its flat trigger, its optic cut. Then he walked to a cardboard box at his feet and he pulled out, with theatrical slowness, an old GR 1911 in a brown leather holster. He held it up by 2 fingers like it was something he had found under a rotten log. "This," he said with a little smile, "is a museum piece. 7 rounds, heavy as a brick, sights you can barely see. A 25-yard weapon on its best day. If any of you show up to my class with one of these on your hip, I'm going to ask you, politely, to leave it in your truck." A few students chuckled. Elias did not move. Travis looked over at his great-uncle with something close to panic in his eyes. Elias had carried a 1911 for 41 years. It was in the canvas bag at his feet right now, but Elias only gave the boy a small private shake of the head, the kind of gesture that said, "Stand easy, this is not your fight." Mercer was not finished. He paced in front of the line and he explained, with the confidence of a man who had never been seriously wrong in public, why the 1911 platform was incapable of precision past 50 yards in practical hands. He cited bullet weight. He cited sight radius. He cited trigger reset. He cited what he called the realities of modern combat, a phrase he used so often that it had become a tic. He told the class that anyone who said they could ring a plate at 100 yards with a 1911 was either a liar or a once-in-a-generation savant who practiced 6 hours a day, and that neither of those categories applied to anyone in the civilian shooting community in the year 2026. One of the students, the tall kid with the sleeve of tattoos, raised his hand and asked if he could bring out his grandfather's old 1911 later, just to see what would happen. Mercer smiled at him the way a high school football coach smiles at a freshman. "Sure, buddy," he said. "We'll let you plink the 25 with it during the break. Just don't expect any miracles." The class laughed. Travis's jaw tightened. Elias reached down, unzipped his bag an inch, checked something inside and zipped it closed again. He was not laughing. He was not angry. He was simply waiting, the way a man waits for rain he has already seen coming down the valley. And as the laughter died down and Mercer turned back to his whiteboard, not one person in that class realized that the old man at the back had been taught to shoot a 1911 as a 19-year-old private by a master sergeant whose name now appeared in the official history of the Marine Corps pistol team in bold print. The first 90 minutes of the class were basic fundamentals. Mercer walked his students through grip, stance, sight alignment, and trigger press, most of it correct, some of it dressed up with phrases he had clearly rehearsed in front of a mirror. Elias listened to all of it without interrupting. He heard things he agreed with. He heard things he did not. He kept his opinions inside his own head, the way he had been taught to do when he was a boy, and his father, a West Virginia coal miner, had told him that a man who talks too much at someone else's table is a man who deserves to leave hungry. During the first break, Travis finally leaned over and whispered, "Uncle Eli, are you going to say anything?" Elias took a long pull from a thermos of black coffee and watched a red-tailed hawk circle over the far berm. "Not yet," he said. "Maybe not at all," Travis frowned, "but he doesn't know who he's talking to." Elias turned his head just slightly and looked at the boy with pale blue eyes that had once picked out a North Vietnamese regular through triple canopy at 800 meters. "Travis," he said, A man who needs everyone to know who he is hasn't actually become anyone yet. You remember that?" Travis didn't answer. He didn't know what to say. Across the lot, Mercer was showing off his custom pistol to a small circle of admirers, doing a fast draw for his phone camera. He dropped the magazine, caught it in midair and grinned at the lens. The tall tattooed kid filmed him. Another student, a woman in her 40s with a brand new chest rig, clapped. Somewhere overhead, the hawk screamed once, long and thin, and banked east toward the Huachuca Mountains. And while Cade Mercer played to his audience, 350 miles to the north, in a brick building on the edge of an airfield outside Phoenix, a retired Marine gunnery sergeant named Dale Kovacs was getting ready to climb into an old white Chevy Suburban and drive south, because he had received a text message from the owner of Vertex Precision that read, simply, Dale. Eli Whitmore signed in for the class, thought you should know. The second half of the morning was distance work. Mercer had set up a drill on the 50-yard steel, a simple timed string of 6 shots on an 8-inch plate. He demonstrated first. His staccato barked 6 times in 4 seconds, and the plate rang cleanly all 6 times, swinging hard on its chain. The class applauded. Mercer bowed. Then, one by one, the students stepped up. Most of them missed more than they hit. A few connected 2 or 3 times. The tall tattooed kid, whose name was Braden, hit the plate once out of 6 and blamed his ammo. Mercer corrected each of them with the same phrase, delivered each time as if it were fresh wisdom. At this distance, the 1911 platform would be completely useless. I hope you're all seeing why we've moved past that design. Travis shot his string next with a borrowed Glock and hit 4 out of 6, which was good work for a young man who had never shot past 25 yards in his life. He walked back to Elias a little flushed, a little proud. Elias nodded once, slowly, and said, "Clean trigger. You slowed down on the last 2. That was right." Travis smiled for the first time that morning. Mercer saw the exchange from across the line. He walked over, hands in his pockets, with a friendly-looking expression that was not actually friendly at all. He looked Elias up and down, from the faded cap to the work boots, and he said, loud enough for the nearby students to hear, "Sir, did you want to shoot a string? We've got spare pistols if you don't have one. No pressure." Elias raised his eyes slowly. The pale blue in them had not faded with age. If anything, it had clarified, the way a pond clears after a storm. "I brought my own," he said. "Thank you." Mercer's smile tightened a fraction. "Oh yeah? What did you bring?" Elias reached down, unzipped the canvas bag, and lifted out the worn leather holster with the Parkerized 1911 inside it. He set it gently on the bench. He did not say a word. Somewhere behind him, Braden laughed out loud, and in the gravel parking lot, a white Suburban with a sun-bleached Marine Corps sticker on the bumper pulled through the front gate and rolled slowly toward the office. Mercer's reaction was, to his credit, controlled. He did not openly mock the old pistol. He simply looked at it on the bench the way a man looks at an embarrassing photograph of himself from high school. Then he turned back to the class and raised his voice slightly. "Folks, gather in. We have a unique opportunity here. This gentleman," and he gestured at Elias without learning his name, "has brought a genuine World War II-era 1911 to class today, and he's going to let us see what it can do on the 50. I want everyone to watch carefully, because this is going to illustrate everything I've been saying this morning about platform limitations." He said it with the tone of a man offering a kindness. The students drifted closer. Phones came out. Braden was already filming. Travis looked sick. Elias did not react at all. He stepped up to the line, picked up the 1911, dropped the magazine into his palm, checked it, seated it, and pulled back the slide with a deliberateness that was almost beautiful. He set his feet, he squared his shoulders, he brought the pistol up in a classic two-handed weaver stance, elbows locked at the angles a man named Colonel Thompson had drilled into him for 600 hours in 1967. He took one breath in, let half of it out, and held. Then, in the space of perhaps 3.5 seconds, the 1911 barked 6 times. Steel rang 6 times. Every single plate hit was centered, audible, unmistakable. The chain jumped, dust rose off the berm, and then silence. Real silence. The kind that settles over a range when something has happened that the instructor did not plan for. Mercer blinked. He opened his mouth. He closed it. Braden lowered his phone. The woman in the chest rig whispered, "Oh my God." Elias cleared the pistol, locked the slide, set it on the bench and stepped back. He still had not said anything since. "I brought my own." Mercer forced a smile. "Well, that was a good demonstration. 50 yards. Nice shooting, sir." Elias turned his head and looked at the instructor with no expression at all. "That was a warm-up," he said quietly. "I'd like to shoot the 100 next, if you don't mind." And at that moment, behind the classroom shack, a man with a grey moustache and a Vertex staff cap on backward stepped out of the Suburban and stopped in the middle of the path, his hand halfway to a cup of coffee, and he stared at the firing line like a man who had just heard his own mother's voice, called from across a crowded room. Mercer laughed. It was not a mean laugh exactly. It was the laugh of a man scrambling to save his footing on a slope he had not realised was ice. "The 100, he said. "Sir, respectfully, I don't want you to embarrass yourself. The 50 was great. Let's just call it there." Elias did not move. He did not blink. "Son," he said in that same quiet voice, "you already told this class that a man with a 1911 can't hit a plate at 100. I think they'd like to see if you're right or not, wouldn't you?" Several of the students shifted uncomfortably. The tall kid, Braden, who 20 minutes earlier had been laughing, now looked at the old man with something different in his face. 100 yards was an enormous amount of ground. It was a football field. At that distance, a standard GI 1911, firing .45 caliber ball ammunition out of a 5-inch barrel with fixed iron sights designed during the Wilson administration, was a thrown rock with hopeful intentions. Everyone there knew it. Elias picked up the pistol again. He held it loose at his side. He waited. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, and then passed uncomfortable into something heavier. Finally, Mercer exhaled, made a go-ahead gesture with both hands, and stepped back. "All right, sir. The 100 is yours. Plates hanging, 6 rounds your pace." He said it with forced generosity, the way a man invites another man to step off a cliff. Behind him, unnoticed by the class, the figure by the Suburban had walked slowly to the edge of the firing line, stopping about 20 feet behind Elias. The man had pulled off his backwards cap and was holding it in both hands, the way a man holds a hat at a funeral. His eyes were wet. He did not say a word. He was not there to interrupt. He was there to witness. And what almost nobody on that range understood yet, including Cade Mercer, was that the old man at the line had, in a previous life, held the Marine Corps record for a 6-round group at 100 yards with a service 1911, a record that had stood for 11 years, from 1973 to 1984, and that had only been broken by the man standing 20 feet behind him, holding his hat. Elias reloaded the pistol. 7 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber, he only needed 6. He set himself again, feet shoulder width, weight slightly forward, shoulders down. He let the pistol rise on its own, up into his line of sight, the front blade settling into the rear notch as if the two had been built to find each other. He focused on the front sight. Not the plate, not the target, the front sight. That had been Colonel Thompson's first and last lesson. Whispered and yelled and muttered and prayed for 57 years. Front sight, press. Front sight, press. He inhaled. He exhaled half. He held. The first shot broke at the bottom of his breath. A long half-second passed, the bullet crossing 100 yards of desert air, and then clean as a bell in a chapel the steel rang. The plate swung hard on its chain. Somebody in the class said out loud, "No way!" Elias did not react. He reset. Front sight. Press. The second shot rang the plate. The third shot rang the plate. By the fourth shot, nobody in the class was breathing normally. By the fifth, Braden had quietly set his phone down because his hands were shaking too much to hold it. The sixth shot cracked, the bullet flew, the steel rang, and the plate swung on its chain at 100 yards with the unmistakable song of a pistol round at centre mass. Elias lowered the weapon. He dropped the magazine. He racked the slide. He locked it back. He set the pistol on the bench with the muzzle downrange and his finger off the trigger. Then, and only then, did he turn around. Cade Mercer was still standing where he had been, but he was no longer the same man. The colour had drained out of his face in uneven patches. His mouth was open. His right hand was on his battle belt, not gripping anything, just resting there as if he had forgotten what hands were for. He tried to speak. He could not. He tried again. Nothing came out. Somewhere in the crowd, the woman in the chest rig began to clap softly once, twice, and then stopped because she did not know if applause was appropriate for what she had just seen. The man with the grey moustache, the one who had stepped out of the Suburban, walked forward through the group of students. The students parted for him without knowing why. He stopped 3 feet in front of Elias, and he came to attention. He did not salute. He was in civilian clothes. But he came to attention, boots together, chin up, shoulders back, the way a Marine comes to attention when his own soul is demanding it of him. And then he spoke the first words anyone had heard on that range in nearly 2 full minutes. "Master Sergeant Whitmore," he said, and his voice cracked in the middle of the rank. "I'll be damned." Elias looked at him for a long moment, and something in the old man's face softened in a way it had not softened all morning. A small, tired smile moved across his mouth and was gone again. "Dale," he said, "they still letting you around firearms?" The man with the grey moustache laughed. It was a short, broken laugh, the kind a man laughs when he's trying very hard not to cry in public. "Only because of you, Top," he said. "Only ever because of you." He turned to the class, and his voice was different now, harder, older, the voice of a man who had spent 30 years telling other men exactly what they needed to hear. "My name is Dale Kovach. I retired out of the Marine Corps Marksmanship Training Unit at Quantico in 2014 as a gunnery sergeant. Before that, I was a member of the Marine Corps pistol team for 19 years. The man standing next to me," and he pointed, "is Master Sergeant Elias Whitmore, United States Marine Corps, retired. He served 28 years on active duty, including 3 combat tours with First Force Reconnaissance in Vietnam between 1966 and 1972. He is a recipient of the Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars with V device, and the Purple Heart, twice. He held the Marine Corps record for a 6-round group at 100 yards with the service 1911 from 1973 until 1984, and the only reason that record was ever broken is that when he retired, they finally let the rest of us practice on the same range he'd been using. Every Marine who has served on the pistol team from 1974 until today has been trained, directly or indirectly, on fundamentals that this man wrote into our manuals by hand." Kovach paused. He looked at Mercer. His eyes were not angry. They were something worse. They were disappointed. "Son," he said, "I don't know what you were trying to teach this morning, but I'll tell you this. Everything you said about the 1911 being obsolete, about distance being impossible, about tradition being dead, you said it 10 feet away from the man who trained the man who trained the man who wrote the current doctrine on precision pistol work in this branch of service. You said it to his face, and he let you say it. Because that's who he is." The silence that followed was absolute. Mercer had sat down. He had not meant to sit down. His legs had simply stopped holding him up, and he had ended up on his own range bag in the dirt, like a man who had been struck behind the knee. He stared at the ground between his boots. He did not look up. He could not look up. The tall kid, Braden, had lowered himself to one knee without thinking about it, the way a man kneels when something sacred has happened in front of him that he does not fully understand. Travis, at the back, was openly crying. Not in sadness, but in a kind of furious pride that had no other outlet. The woman in the chest rig had a hand over her mouth, and Elias Whitmore, Master Sergeant, Marine Raider, 80 years old, with a piece of metal in his shoulder from 1969, and a cap so faded you could barely see the eagle, simply stood at the firing line and waited for the moment to pass. He did not speak for a long time. When he finally did, he did not raise his voice. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone," he said. He looked at Mercer, who was still on the ground. "Son, stand up." Mercer didn't move at first. Elias said it again, gentler. "Cade, stand up. A Marine doesn't correct another man from above. You stand up and you look at me." Mercer looked up, startled at the sound of his own first name. He got to his feet slowly. His face was wet. He did not try to hide it. Elias walked 3 steps toward him, across the gravel, the old 1911 still sitting on the bench behind him. He stopped close enough that only Mercer could hear what he was about to say, though the wind carried it to Travis and to Kovach anyway. "The pistol isn't the point," Elias said. "The pistol's never been the point. You can teach a man to shoot in 6 weeks. You can't teach him to respect what he doesn't understand. That's the part you got wrong, not the ballistics. The ballistics are easy. The respect is the hard part. You fix that part and you're going to be a fine instructor. You don't fix it, and you're going to spend the rest of your life telling stories about men you never bothered to meet. He put his hand on Mercer's shoulder. He let it rest there for exactly 3 seconds. Then he stepped back, and he nodded once, the way a sergeant dismisses a private. "Class is yours, son. Keep going. I'll wait my turn like the rest of them." But the class was not going to keep going in any ordinary way. Not after that. Mercer stood for a long moment with his hand on his own chest, as if trying to keep something in place. Then he turned to the 20 students gathered in a loose, half-circle behind him, and he cleared his throat, and he did something Cade Mercer had never once done in public in the 4 years he had been running Vertex Tactical. He apologised. He apologised to the class for what he had said about the 1911, and for how he had said it, and for the tone with which he had invited Elias to shoot. He apologised to Elias by name, using the full rank Kovac had given him, Master Sergeant Whitmore, without stumbling over the words. He apologised to Travis, specifically, for talking down to a young man who was about to ship to Paris Island. He did not apologise well because he had never practised it, but he apologised completely, which is the only kind of apology that actually matters. When he was done, he stood there with his hands at his sides, and he waited to see if anyone would walk out. Nobody walked out. Braden, the tall tattooed kid, stepped forward instead. He looked at Elias, and then at Mercer, and then at Elias again, and he said, in a voice that was not entirely steady, "Sir, Master Sergeant, would you, if you're willing, would you finish the class? I'll pay you. The whole group will pay you. We'll pay double. We didn't come out here to learn what we already thought. We came out here to learn something we didn't know." There was a murmur of agreement from the students. Money came out of wallets. Travis began laughing and crying at the same time. Kovac, still standing at parade rest in the dirt, smiled like a man who had just watched the ending of a movie he had been waiting 60 years to see. Elias held up a hand. "Put your money away," he said. "I don't teach for money, I never have. But I'll stay until sundown and I'll tell you everything I know about this pistol. If Cade here runs the drills, he's got the classroom, I've got the corrections. That work?" Mercer nodded. He could not speak. He just nodded. They shot for 6 hours that day. The sun crossed the Arizona sky, and the shadows of the berms grew long and thin across the gravel, and Master Sergeant Elias Whitmore stood behind the firing line and corrected grip, stance, breath, and trigger press on 20 civilian shooters, one at a time, without ever raising his voice. He did not demonstrate again. He did not need to. Every student who walked up to the line that afternoon shot better than they had shot that morning, and most of them shot better than they had ever shot in their lives, because Elias Whitmore had been, among many other things, the best pistol coach the Marine Corps ever produced. He coached Mercer last. He stood behind him at the 50-yard line and he adjusted Mercer's thumb by a 1/4 inch and told him to stop fighting the recoil and let the pistol return to his line of sight on its own. Mercer shot his string, 6 for 6, faster and tighter than he had shot in his life. When he lowered the pistol, he turned around and looked at Elias and he said softly, "Why didn't you correct me this morning?" Elias took a long moment to answer. "Because some corrections have to be earned," he said. "I couldn't give it to you until you were ready to take it. This morning you weren't ready." Mercer nodded. He didn't trust himself to speak. By the time the last student packed up and drove out of the lot, Dale Kovac had pulled 2 folding chairs out of the Suburban and set them up in the shade of the classroom shack with a small cooler between them. He and Elias sat in those chairs for nearly an hour, drinking cold water and saying very little, the way old Marines speak to each other, which is mostly without words at all. Travis sat nearby on a bench and listened to what they did say. They talked about a mission in 1970 that neither of them had ever discussed with anyone outside a debrief room. They talked about a young corporal named Ramirez who had died on a ridge in Quang Tri Province, with his hand on Elias's arm. They talked about Colonel Thompson, long dead, and the old range at Quantico, now rebuilt twice. They did not talk about the 1911. They didn't need to. The pistol sat on the bench between them, clean and quiet, as if it had said everything it needed to say. In the weeks after that Saturday, things changed at Vertex Tactical, slowly at first, and then all at once. Cade Mercer took down the promotional videos on his social media that disparaged older platforms. He wrote a long post, nearly 2,000 words, about what he had learned on a range in southern Arizona, from a man he had tried to embarrass, and the post was shared over 100,000 times in its first week. He invited Elias to teach a weekend precision pistol clinic at the end of the following month, and Elias, after thinking about it for 3 days, agreed, on the condition that half the spots go to young enlisted service members at no charge. The clinic filled in 14 hours. Kovac came down from Phoenix to help. Travis came back from Paris Island on graduation leave to attend, and he stood at the firing line in his dress blues and listened to his great-uncle explain the fundamentals of the 1911 platform to a class of 40 students, 20 of whom were active duty. Braden came too, without his tattoos showing this time, wearing a plain grey t-shirt and a humility he had not owned 2 months earlier. He had been practicing. Elias watched him shoot and nodded once and said, "You slowed your press. Keep slowing it. In a year you'll be dangerous." Braden smiled like a man who had just been given a gift worth more than money. Mercer himself attended the clinic, not as an instructor, but as a student, in a plain black polo with no Vertex logo on it, and he took notes in a small spiral notebook, the way a boot private takes notes on his first day at the School of Infantry. In the months after that, Mercer and Elias stayed in touch. Mercer began driving down to Sierra Vista once a month to sit on Elias's porch and ask questions about things he could not find in any manual. Elias answered them. He never charged him. He never asked for anything in return. One evening, near sunset, Mercer asked him directly why he had been willing to mentor a man who had publicly insulted him. Elias looked out over the desert for a long moment. "Because nobody gets to be old without being young first," he said. "And every young man I ever met deserved at least one second chance from somebody older than him. I had mine. I owe this one." The last time I heard the story told, it was told by Cade Mercer himself, on his own YouTube channel, to an audience of 300,000 subscribers. He told it straight. He didn't varnish it. He named himself as the instructor who had been wrong. He named Master Sergeant Elias Whitmore as the man who had corrected him. He played the audio clip, just the audio of 6 rounds ringing a steel plate at 100 yards, one after another, clean as church bells. And then he said, on camera, with his eyes on the lens and his voice steady, "The older I get, the more convinced I become that the men and women who served before us don't owe us anything. They already paid. We owe them. We owe them our respect, our attention, and our willingness to learn from them before they are gone. And I'm telling you, as somebody who got taught that lesson the hard way, you do not want to learn it the way I learned it. You want to learn it by walking up to an old veteran in a worn-out bull cap and offering him your hand and your ear before he has to pick up a pistol to prove who he is." Elias Whitmore is 81 now. He still wakes up before the sun. He still works the stiffness out of his right shoulder in slow circles, one direction and then the other. He still keeps that Parkerized 1911 in the floor safe in the spare bedroom, on a bed of folded blue felt, and he still takes it out to the range on Saturday mornings when his knees will let him. The last time I spoke to him, he was coaching a 15-year-old girl from Tucson who had never fired a handgun in her life. He was adjusting her thumb by 1/4 of an inch and telling her, very quietly, that the pistol wasn't the point. The pistol had never been the point. If this story moved you, if you believe the men and women who served our country deserve to be seen long after the uniform comes off, take 1 second and subscribe to this channel. Share this story with a veteran in your life. And if you have ever underestimated someone because of how they looked, comment the word respect below. Because somewhere, right now, there is another old man in a faded cap, sitting quietly at the back of a classroom waiting to see if anyone in the room is going to ask his name, be the one who asks.